On today's Reveal Report, we talk about the hideous acts of terrorism from the Islamists against the Jewish community at the Manchester Synagogue and how the UK Prime Minister came out and condemned it. However, he's helped fueling it in his country with his policy decisions, allowing it to flood into his country and also by recognizing the Palestinian state in spite of President Trump and all his efforts to bring peace to Gaza. We also will talk about something that neither the left and the right media outlets seem to want to talk about, and that is the rise of persecution against the Christians in Nigeria, not only in South Korea, not only in Canada, like we talked about in yesterday's Revealed Report, but also heavily in Nigeria. And we want to talk about that because it is also a warning to the UK that if they keep going down this path, they could see the same things happen in their country. I also want to talk about how the government shutdown has no end in sight and why that is, and how Trump is looking at doing major cutbacks. Welcome back to the Revealed Report. I'm your host, John Wilson. Let's get into it. If you like the content of today's episode and you would like to help further our mission, do us a favor, smash the subscribe button or gently tap it. It all works the same. Give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment, and share us with somebody else. Thank you for your support. Well, many so-called people on the right that are nothing more than reprobates that are joining people on the left to condemn Israel and side with the ones that say from the river to the sea that want to totally eliminate Israel and say death to Israel, who also happen to be the same ones that say death to America because they hate the ideas of the West, and the same ones that happen to also cause a lot of problem for the Jewish community kids that just want to go to the college universities. We're supposed to believe that there's a massive genocide taking place because Israel is trying to win a war, which is usual in history. And yet Israel is the only nation that is not allowed to win a war. And so we have some that are reprobates on the right joining league with the left to come against Israel and trying to side with the same people that hate the ideas of the West and hate America as well. And we can see that they claim that Israel controls everything. AIPAC, AIPAC, AIPAC. They control the politicians. They control all the media. And yet every time I come out with a video, all I get is the lifeless bots that are siding with Islam coming out and attacking us. We don't see as much of that from the Jewish community as much as we see from the Islamic community. But yet we're supposed to buy all these lies, even though Islam is trying to push Sharia law in much of the world. Even in Texas recently, they had a court ruling against the ability for Sharia law to be pushed in our own nation because they want a global takeover. That's exactly what the Quran tells them to do. And they even practice lying to infidels for the cause of trying to push Sharia law inside of all the world because they believe that they're setting things up for the second coming of Jesus Christ, who's going to point everybody unto Allah, and then we're all going to be to Muhammad, who's going to convince us that Allah is the right God, and then we're all going to practice Sharia law. And they're trying to push this in all the world, and you see that they have no problem with acts of terrorism. And yet we've seen this against the Jewish community with the Manchester Synagogue attack. I'm reading the report from CNN entitled October 2nd, 2025, Manchester Synagogue Attack. And the report reads, and I quote, two prominent Jewish organizations in the UK have said that today's attack at synagogue was sadly something we feared was coming. Really? Because I have a little bit of criticism about that. As we emerge from the fast of Yom Kippur, the holiest day in our calendar, many in our community will only now be learning of the horrific attack on Heaton Park Hebrew congregation in Manchester. A joint statement from the Jewish Leadership Council and the Board of Deputies of British Jews said. The organization said they were devastated at the loss of two members of the Jewish community. At a time of rising anti-Semitism in the UK, this attack was sadly something we feared was coming, the joint statement said. We call on all those in positions of power and influence to take the required action to combat hatred against Jewish people, and we'll be working with the authorities on a series of additional measures to protect our community over the coming days, it added. We see that the UK Prime Minister Starmer came out and he condemned the action, but I have some level of criticism towards him because they are constantly allowing them to flood into the country, and they're not having to assimilate to the culture, and they're wanting to bring their jihadist Sharia law right into the UK. And we see that there's a lot of problems that are rising up. And the moment that Starmer went out and he condemned these actions, there was Palestinian protests that were taking place, pro-Palestinian protests that were taking place right outside his office. And you see, they have no problem engaging in violent acts to try to heat things up in the street, and then use the ones that want to talk about peace so that we buy into it, so they can flip our systems inside out. It's the same thing the radical left does. That's why the radical left and the Islamists get along so well, because they have one thing in common. That is their enemy. They hate Israel, they hate America, and they hate the West. And they join league with one another, even though they have nothing in common with one another, so that they can destroy everybody that does not practice what they believe. And if they get their wish list and they begin to take over our nations, then they'll turn on each other, because they're only using each other like a dirty woman, and they'll cast each other aside for their own purposes. For the Islamists, they want to push Sharia law in all the world. For the humanists, they want to push humanism in all the world, postmodernistic ideology. The only similarity they both have, they hate Israel and they hate Christianity. And Starmer helped cause some of this. He's allowing the borders to be open, allowing them to flood into their country. And we see a rise of anti Semitic violence. We also see a rise against anti Christianity, because the humanists hate Christianity and the Islamists hate the Jews. And yet they join together because they hate anything that resembles the Bible, anything that resembles God, and especially anything that's the rightful seed of Abraham. They absolutely despise it and want nothing more to destroy it inside of their countries. And yet, while the prime minister can come out and condemn these actions, he also joined with Australia and Canada to recognize a Palestinian state, which causes the war to continue on. Because while we've been saying that the Palestinian people really need to quit siding and supporting their leadership that's getting them slaughtered, they need to get rid of Hamas and all these acts of terrorism. We can't talk about a two-state solution as long as they're funding terrorism around the world. As long as they keep saying from the river to the sea, they want to end Israel altogether, and especially while they keep throwing their fist up in the air, dancing in the streets, saying death to America. Why would we negotiate with that? And you see that Trump is saying that if you don't hand back the hostages, Israel's at the door of Gaza, and we're going to take our hands off and let them finish the job. But yet the prime minister of the UK, Australia, and Canada, they come out, they recognize a Palestinian state, which then incentivizes the people of Palestine to side with their leadership, because they think they're winning the war. They think they're winning in the media, and they're influencing the world to turn on Israel. And that's exactly what we're seeing, is anti-Semitism rising up, turning against Israel, and siding with those that want to destroy the West. And so the prime minister can come out and condemn it, but he's helped fueling the problem. He's helped fueling the war by recognizing the Palestinian state, and he's also helped fueling the issue when he leaves his borders wide open. This is why President Trump does need to close our borders. As you don't think that they'll go down south of the border and then try to smuggle their way into our country, so that they set up terrorist cells inside of our country, just planning the day of some great attack? Has anybody forgot 9/11? I haven't. I would like not to relive it again. And so I do not cut the UK Prime Minister any slack. He's coming out, save face, and condemning it. Great, glad. Why don't you change your policies? Why don't you begin to take a stand against it and protect the Jewish community and protect Christians? Because let me tell you about what's going on in Nigeria, even though the mainstream media, both the left and the right, doesn't want to talk about it. There's massive persecution of Christians in Nigeria, predominantly from terrorist groups like Boko Haram and other Islamist groups. So let me give you some statistics. Nigeria is a religiously diverse country, roughly split between a Christian population, mainly in the south and the middle belt, and a Muslim population, mainly in the north, with also traditional indigenous faiths. Over recent decades, Nigeria has seen repeated episodes of religiously motivated violence, often intertwined with ethnic, economic, land, and resource disputes. Christian persecutions in Nigeria is commonly reported in the context of violent attacks, massacres and killings, kidnappings, abductions, especially of clergy, churchgoers, women, and children, destruction of churches, property, homes, livelihoods, pressure, threats, forced conversions, extortion, denial of rights, refusal of permission for church buildings, land disputes, weak or ineffective protection / justice from state authorities. So let's talk about the scale and the trends. In 2024, there was a reported 3,100 Christians killed, 2,830 Christians kidnapped, Open Doors World Watch List reports. In 2025, and we're only halfway through 3/4 through 2025, but the reporting was only on the first half of 2025. I quote, reports suggest 7,087 Christians killed in the first 7 months, 7,800 kidnaps. Since 2000, some sources claim roughly 62,000 Christians were murdered since 2000. Since 2009, over 50,000 Christians killed between 2009 and 2023. Martyred Christians in Nigeria reported. The recent cluster attacks. In 1 week in 2025, 85 Christians were killed in central Nigeria in coordinated attacks. At least 218 people killed, 6,000 plus displaced in attacks against mostly Christian villages in Benue State. Reports suggest up to 1,200 churches could be destroyed annually in Nigeria in recent years. Nigeria's Bishops' Conference indicates 145 Catholic priests kidnapped over past 10 years, including non-Catholic clergy. The number is higher. In many years, Nigeria leads the world in the number of Christians killed for their faith, more than many other countries combined, per Open Door assessments. The violence is not confined to the far north. It increasingly affects the middle belt, central Nigeria, and sometimes even parts of the south. The rate of abductions in certain periods has declined compared to previous years. Report a 41% drop in abductions quarter two 2023 versus quarter two 2022, but yet now in 2025, we see a major spike in it. Let's talk about some of the key actors and patterns of persecution. Militant Islamist groups like Boko Haram and its offshoot Islamic State West Africa province are often cited as perpetrators of attacks against Christian communities. Fulani militant herders. In many central and northern states, clashes between predominantly Muslim Fulani herders and predominantly Christian farmers over land and resources are frequently reported. These disputes often acquire a religious dimension. And let me tell you what it is. The Islamists want to take over more territory, just like the humanists. State institutional failures. Many reports argue that the government security forces are unable to and unwilling to adequately protect vulnerable Christian communities, to hold perpetrators accountable, or to prevent recurrence. Women and girls in Christian communities are reportedly vulnerable to kidnapping, sexual assault, forced marriage, and pressure to convert. Priests, pastors, church leaders are often singled out for kidnapping or killing as symbolic attacks on Christian institutions. And so we see that there's a rise in Christian persecution in Nigeria, but neither the mainstream media of the left or the right want to report on it. And I want to know why. Why are we constantly talking about the Middle East, but we're not talking about Nigeria? Why are we not talking about the persecution of the Christians? Why are we not hearing a lot about the pastor that was arrested in South Korea because he's trying to push against the ideologies that come against the Bible, and they're deeming it to be political, so now they have arrested him? What about when Justin Trudeau, the former prime minister of Canada, was siding with those and trying to be sympathetic with those that were burning down churches? And yet Canada is still seeing this rise of push against Christianity today. And it seems like the Canadian government has no problem with it, because humanism and Islamism has one thing in common. They hate Christianity and they hate Israel. And yet we're supposed to buy into the reprobate side of the aisle that is siding with the humanists today to destroy the world, to bring a combination of humanism and Islamism into all of the world, which has one thing in common: destroy anything that doesn't agree with it. And when it's done, they'll turn on each other because they disagree with one another as well. The only difference between them and us is they'll put their differences aside to assimilate together for the cause of destroying us until that job is done. And then when it's done, then they'll turn on each other, while we just fight each other over every little squabble and every little thing. And so we find that the Prime Minister of the UK needs to watch out. And even J.D. Vance warned about this, that if he's not careful, he's going to allow this to come into his country and it's going to destroy his country. And there could be a problem with Islam trying to take over the UK. And that's why President Trump needs to crack down. That's why we need ICE agents doing their job. And we don't need to be demonized for trying to have border control and trying to have a safe, protected country. We're not unsympathetic because of that. Because if the United States of America is eroded away and torn down from within, then we can't have a great country that people want to flood into. There's a reason why everybody will flood into our country, even go across shark infested waters at times to try to come into our country, because we offer the greatest level of freedom. And we have the American dream still, that if you work hard and if you pursue after it, you can become something. And so we need to protect that so other people want to come to our country so it doesn't get destroyed from within. And we have the same problems like everywhere else. And if you think it can't happen to the United States of America, it can continually happen if we allow it to continually erode away our country from within until we're so weak that we don't have the power to stand up against outside forces. And then I even have some that are trying to debate with me about how they don't believe in Christianity. And my response to that is that what good has humanism brought to any nation? What good has Marxist ideology brought to any nation? Communism, humanism, Marxism, postmodernism. It brings a dystopian hell within the country, and it tears down liberty and freedom because man begins to rule over man rather than the individual rights of the man to govern themselves in the very sight of God, because we have certain inalienable rights endowed to us by our Creator God. And usually, the people that campaign against Christianity won't campaign against the idea of educators teaching that the Trojan War is an absolute, even though we don't have any source of the time that shows that it's an absolute. We only have Homer's Iliad later, and we say, well, that must be true, even though it's century later, century at least a century later, after the so-called war took place, and educators will teach it as an absolute truth. But yet we have historical documents of Jesus Christ's existence in the New Testament church before, within a century time frame, and yet they'll call that a fallacy, but yet they'll agree that the Trojan War should be taught in schools as if it's an absolute truth. You know why they are hypocrites? Is because there's an enemy that is attacking Christianity. There is a demonic force that's trying to tear Christianity down in all of the world and wants to destroy Israel as well. And that demonic forces is assimilated together to fight against us because this is what brings a greater good. And demonic forces hate that. And so there's so-called people of truth that are nothing more than hypocrites that put all their focus on trying to destroy Israel and Christianity. And in the end, what are they going to get? A dystopian hell on earth. That's what it always brings. That's what it always causes. And so I support the president trying to protect our nation, and the UK should be doing the same so we don't have the problem that's happening in Nigeria, where the Islamists have camped in the north and now they're wanting to take the middle and they're wanting to take the south. You know why? Because Islamists are not comfortable on the outside. They want to take over everything. Exactly like humanists. They're not okay with just being on the outside of the four walls of your church. No, they want to come and take your church too. They want to take your pulpit. They want to shutter the doors of your church. They want to close your mouth, because if you don't side with all their ideologies and all of their tyranny, then they're going to try to crush you. And so I thank God we have a strong president. And if the United States is not careful, we could vote back in some crazy person like the old lion Joe Biden or Calamity Kami Harris, and we can be right down the path of destroying our nation and seeing the problems here that we're seeing in the UK. We already have enough problems. We already have Jewish kids that are debating whether they can keep their on their head because they're afraid they're going to be persecuted when they go into their college universities. This should never be taking place in the United States of America. And let me remind you, our nation was not built on the Quran. I had Muslim friends and I love them very well, but our nation was not built on the Quran. It was built on the Bible, and it was built especially on the Ten Commandments of God that used to be pushed from our court system, but now they wanted to take that out of the court system. There is a humanistic Islamist coming together to create one evil little horn antichrist spirit that's trying to destroy everything that's the true seed of Abraham, either by the literal uh, seed of Isaac or the seed of Abraham by faith. And so I am not letting the UK Prime Minister off the hook. I'm glad that you're condemning the actions, but you need to go and you need to protect your borders. You need to condemn it by policy, not just by save face and just going out before the media and saying what you know they want to hear. Now, as far as the government shutdown in the United States of America, it seems like there's no end in sight because AOC's ratings are going up and Chucky Schumer's going down. And so AOC is kind of holding that against Chucky Schumer, and he has no spine anymore because he's a coward, because the radical left are cowards because all they care about is control. And so if they don't have control, they'll sell their soul for control. And we see that with Chucky Schumer right now as he's holding the American tax dollars at hostage, and he's holding uh, government workers at hostage and the American budget at hostage so they can try to dump in trillions of dollars into a wasted, broken system, Obamacare, and especially because they want to fund taxpayer dollars to illegal immigrants so they can have government subsidy, they can have government handouts, they can have Obamacare, which is supposed to be affordable health care. Who knew that the radical left was so good at redefining the language that affordable actually meant more expensive? But just remember, if you want your doctor, you can keep your doctor. There's no end, it seems like, to the shutdown. The radical left has dug their heels in, and the mainstream media come out and they'll keep blaming the right, even though President Trump ran on slashing all these things and he got voted in to fulfill that mission. And so he's holding up to his word. Thank God we have a president now that doesn't just try to get in office and lie to us just so we vote him in, but truly is standing for the things he said he would stand for. And he's going to cut all of this out. And so Trump is now looking at doing major cuts to the government, to all the bureaucrats in Washington. And so I don't know, maybe this will help him drain the swamp. Because the truth of the matter is, if we're all franticking and panicking because of a federal government shutdown, which by the way, they shut down every weekend. So I don't know what a couple days was going to cost. But if we're franticking and panicking at a government shutdown, maybe that means the government has become too much of a leviathan and it's become over bloated, and we need to slim it down and we need to cut back some of the fat of it. Now, does that mean that some people are going to lose their jobs? Yeah, I hate that. What are we going to do? We going to keep over bloating Washington at the expense of our future and not be stewards over what God has given us, and that we're going to enslave ourselves and we're going to bring a death spiral to our country for which Benjamin Franklin and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson all warned against? That is one of the greatest ways to destroy your country, is just to mount up insurmountable debt that you're never going to pay off. And now we're breaking the law of economy because most countries, that if there's debt to service the debt goes beyond their debt of the national defense, usually that means they're going to collapse. And yet we have gone past that. And now we're just riding by the grace and the mercy of God. And so America is not exempt from the laws of economy, just like the laws of nature, and especially the laws of God. If it's brought countries down in the past, it bring countries down today. And so I believe that the GOP, I'm praying for the GOP that they will not be cowards like they have been in the past. I have called them milquetoast reprobates because they always been to the pressure of the left because they have controlled the mainstream media. However, the mainstream media is a dying media source. CNN's ratings and all of that are dying, and independent outlets are beginning to rise up because their voice is not being heard so much anymore. And it also gives hope that maybe one day we get out of this two-party de facto system and we do have more people running and more opportunities for independence that maybe represent our voices a little bit better to have an opportunity to become the president one day. We never thought the leviathan of the mainstream media would collapse, but it is eroding away little by little. And so there is hope that our country is down a better path. Even though we see the hardships of today, there is still hope that we might be down a better path, because the grenade, Donald Trump came in and blew up the system and exposed it right before our very eyes. And so I'm praying that the GOP will not be cowards, that they'll stand and they'll not let the radical left keep over bloating our our Washington, our federal government, because the power was not supposed to be in the federal government. The power was supposed to be with the states. But Woodrow Wilson, one of the fathers of progressivism, which I call it digressivism, came in and he wanted to centralize the power back to the federal government through the Supreme Court. He instituted the tax system as we're seeing today, and he wanted a big government. He thought the Constitution. He mocked Thomas Jefferson when he talked about the inalienable rights endowed to us, the individual by our Creator God. He wanted a big government. He thought big government is the thing that we need, and so he mocked the individual rights, and he wanted to centralize the power back to the federal government. And then there was the creation of the Federal Reserve to try to help that. And this is exactly what defines the radical left. They like an overbloated big government. And yet we as conservatives say we need to slim it down. But the only way we're going to slim it down is we have to understand sometimes it's going to get a little ugly. And we need to pray for the GOP to have a spine to stand up. And they need to be wise on going out before the general public and putting the blame back on where the blame is at. It's on the radical left. It's on the crazy AOCs that want to hold it at hostage so that they can waste a bunch of money on broken systems. And so I thank God that the GOP is standing right now, and I pray that they continue to stand. America, we have become overbloated in Washington, and at some point, if we're going to save the republic, it needs to be a slimming down of that. So maybe this isn't so bad after all, even though it's not going to be easy. And so I'm praying for the strength of people that are being affected by this. And I pray that God will open up a door for you, that you can go and you can make your survival without the need for the radical left to push this on the right, and then for the bend to the pressure. America, I love you. I pray you have a great weekend. It's Friday. The Republic still stands, hasn't completely blown up yet. So I'll see you on Monday if it's still standing.